The beauty of being creative is that you never know where your creativity is going to lead you. You may start out writing a story about finding a dog, and then it turns out that really the story is a story about finding yourself. And it's actually great when that happens. So today what I want to talk about is when it seems like you're going in the wrong direction, sometimes it can actually end up being the right direction, and why you should trust your creative muse.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julie Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julie Amante. I'm a women's fiction author, and I'm here on Fridays to give you some writing tips to help you write your story. Okay, so today let's talk about this going in the wrong direction and why actually that is okay. So there are two ways usually that writers start to write their book, right? So one is that you already have that idea. You've been thinking about an idea. You've sort of been plotting this idea in your head. You know exactly what you want to write. And so you sit down and you either start plotting it or you start writing it. So that's the first scenario. Second scenario is that you really don't know what you want to write. You have no idea. Maybe you have a vague idea of a story. You want to write a story about a nurse. You want to write a story about the end of the world, whatever, right? You have an idea, but you don't really have a plot yet. You don't really have characters. You just have a thought. Now, with both scenarios, you can end up going in the wrong direction or following a path that is wrong or not what you intended. Even if the first scenario where you already knew exactly what you wanted to write and you had this whole plan, you can still end up writing yourself into a corner. You can still end up going in the wrong direction. So how do you avoid that? Well, first of all, let's talk about why you might not want to, right? I will tell you how you can avoid it, but you want to think about why it's also smart, really, to follow that path, because it may be the real story that you're wanting to write and you just don't know about it. And I get it. It can be frustrating actually to find that as you're writing, you keep going in the wrong direction. You're finding that this is not where I wanted my story to go, but it keeps wanting to go there. And the reason that it's a good idea to follow it is because you probably will end up writing a better, more honest story, because it's probably the real story that needs to come out. Okay, so one of the things that ended up happening to me back when I was writing under my pseudonym Laura Rios is I had sold a few romances. I'd sold 4 romances actually to Kensington Publishing, and the line ended up closing. So my first book came out, my second book was about to come out, and then they closed the line. So here I had a book that was about to be released, 2 other books that were waiting to be released, and there was no line, so they were going to be shelved basically and not, not used. So I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I need to find a new publisher. I need to write something different. And I started trying to send out my ideas to different publishers, and I kept getting rejected. And the reason that I was getting rejected was because the stories were not Latino enough, because I was writing Latino characters. I was writing for a Latino line. And I, this was a big frustration, because what does that mean, right? What does it mean to write books that are Latino enough? There's no one way to be Latino. So anyhow, I kept wanting to write a story that wasn't selling, and I was getting frustrated. I thought, well, what's the problem here? So I ended up writing a story, and you might have heard my story. You might have heard this in previous recordings, but I ended up sitting down and saying, okay, I'm going to write a story that's Latino enough. I'm going to write a character who wants to become Latina enough. And so that's what I started doing. And it was really just joking around, a frustration. I was going to take all the Latino stereotypes and I was going to put it into this one character, and she was going to try to become more Latino, which is silly, ridiculous, kind of funny, but it helped me to kind of get that, my frustrations out. And my agent ended up really liking it. It kept asking me, "What are you writing? What are you writing?" And I told her what I was writing. She's like, "I want to see that." And it's like, no, really, this was just for me. This is just not what I intended. This is not what I intend to write. This is definitely going down the wrong path for me, right? This isn't what I wanted. But she kept insisting, so I sent it to her thinking, okay, she's going to read this and laugh and say, okay, yeah, you're right, this is not what we want. But the opposite was true. She really ended up loving it and ended up pitching it to publishers, and it ended up going into a bidding war between two publishers. So here, something that I thought was definitely the wrong path, something that I was not intending to write, ends up being exactly what I should have written, right? Exactly what needed to be written. Because again, it was more honest. It was something that I was really feeling, and it came through in the writing. So following that path that I was sure was wrong ended up being what needed to be written and what sold to publishers, because publishers could feel that. So what I want to suggest here is that you learn to follow your creative energy, that you have this creative energy, you have this sort of internal knowledge of what really needs to be written and how to make the most out of that creative energy that you have. And follow it, trust it. And even if you feel like your story is not going where you thought it should go, that you give it a try. Go where your creativity is taking you, because there might be a reason for that. There might be it might be the more honest story. It might be the story that you really want to tell, but maybe you're not brave enough yet to tell it, right? You're thinking, okay, it's going to make me vulnerable. It's going to make me, whatever might, the fear might be that you don't really want to tell the story. But inside, something is saying, this is the story that you should be writing, and this is why you're going to do it, whether you want to or not, right? Sometimes you have no choice, because that's where it takes you. So let's talk about following that creative energy. Okay, so let me go back to this book for a second, right? Why was Becoming Latina in 10 Easy Steps actually so popular with publishers? Why did it go into a bidding war? Why did my agent like it? Well, like I said, first of all, it was because I was honest, right? It was an honest story. It was something that I was really feeling. And as I'm writing this book, I actually really ended up loving my character. So that came through too, right? Where if I really love this character who's telling the story, I want, people are going to feel this. It's going to feel like a more authentic person, because to me, she was real. To me, she was the girl, the character, right, that was saying all the things that maybe I wanted to say, who was trying to desperately become more Latina when she already knew that she didn't need to do that. So what was I really saying here? This book was intended for like the 20-something audience, 20-30s, right, young women. And what I was telling young women was, you have nothing to prove. You don't have to change who you are in order to be accepted by someone else. You already are good enough the way you are. You already are you, and that's enough. So it was deeper than just this one character. It was what I was really intending to say to my audience and to my publishers and to my agents and to all the people who were reading this book. And that, right, that little kernel of truth and that message to my audience was what people picked up on, right? It was never said anywhere. I never intentionally, wrote that out, but people could feel that when they were reading the story, that really that was what I was really saying, and it touched people's hearts. So in my own frustration about not being understood as a Latina, so because that's who I am, and I have people who actually were not Latina telling me that the books were not Latino enough, which is, again, frustrating. I took my frustration, put it into the character who actually embodied that frustration of not being accepted or not being understood. And that came through in the story. So by following your creative energy and going where the story might lead you, you're going to be showing your audience your authentic self. You're going to be honest, and they're going to feel that, right? They're going to feel that, and they're going to say, okay, I understand. And also whatever message is behind there, because there's always a message, and it should be, and you should determine what that message is at some point too, right? So when I was writing it, I didn't know that this was the message that was coming through the story. I didn't intend that. I thought it was the wrong story, all of that, right? But eventually I realized, well, this is what I'm really saying here. This is what is really attracting my readers. And that's what will happen to you too. So if you're following that creative energy, it knows what it's trying to say. So it's kind of hard, it's kind of scary because it's very easy also to end up in the wrong place with the wrong story that doesn't say anything. So you may be going down a path that eventually you're going to have to backtrack and say, this isn't what I intended to say. There's always that possibility, right? But it's more likely that you're going to realize that it was actually the right path and that you're writing a deeper, more authentic story. Okay, so that's the first thing, is making sure that you are following that creative energy and trusting it. Pausing for a second to let you know about a couple of courses that I've created. If you're a beginning writer and you want some help with your book, I just want to let you know that I do have a basic course on how to write, and I'm going to post it below. And if you're not a beginning writer, but you are more established and you're ready to publish your work, you have your novel written, I also have a publishing course. And I will also post it below, so take a look at it. Maybe they'll be just what you're looking for. All right, let's go back to the video now. So the second thing I want you to consider is for those of you who know exactly, like you've already plotted everything out and you know exactly what you're going to write, or at least you know what you'd like to write, and you don't really want to deviate from that. Sometimes what you do need to do is rethink it a little bit. And I've seen this with students. So I've seen students that are writing essays and they're writing about, let's say, a parent's divorce. Well, actually, they're writing about something else, right? They're writing. I had one student who wanted to write about lucid dreaming, but he had his parents were going through a divorce, and that was sort of consuming. It's just his story was not coming through. His essay was not about the dreams and lucid dreaming, all that. It just didn't feel inspired. It didn't feel good. You know, it just, the writing didn't feel good. And this person was a good writer. So I thought, well, what's going on here? So we had a little conference, and then come to find out, oh, I have so much on my mind because my parents are getting divorced and all this. And it's like, well, why don't you write about that? It's like, oh no. So he rejected it immediately. It's like, no, I know what I want to write about. I know a lot about this topic and I want to write about this. And I said, well, just try it. Write about the divorce. You can always come back to this other essay if you don't want to, you know, if you don't like it. Well, what happened was that the new essay on the divorce and the impact that it has on young adults was such a good essay. It was so much stronger because, why? Because what we just talked about, right? It was a more honest, it was more authentic, and the writer was putting more of himself into the writing, not necessarily like his personal story, but just more of his heart and more of his emotions into the story. Ended up being a really fantastic essay. So sometimes what happens is we reject it, right? We reject going into the other path, going down the wrong path. But actually, when we do and we trust it, we do find that it's a stronger story. And again, because we end up putting more of ourselves into that story. Okay, so one of the ways, so I mentioned that this could get us into trouble, and you know, how exactly should you do this? Then how should you know that it's okay to follow the wrong path? Well, we don't always know. Okay, so we could be going down the wrong path and then it's really the wrong path and we want to come back. But how do you avoid that a little bit? One of the ways is, especially if you're a plotter, right? I think that you should plot your story. I've done both. I'm a plotter and a pantser, so I do sometimes. I used to do more of this, of just sitting down, just writing the story and see where it went. And basically what I was doing is I was plotting it as I was writing. So my rough draft was really my plot, right? But that really does lead to all kinds of deviations from what is the central story. And so now I do a little bit more plotting. It's loose, but it's definitely more structured than it used to be back when I first started writing. So I definitely think you should plot. I think you should have an idea of where you want to go, and I think that, you know, it's helpful to have this roadmap of where to go before you start writing. However, I don't want you to be too stuck on that plot that you're afraid to pay attention when something else is happening. So I do this meditation that's really good, that I think about whatever it is, a goal, right? So I envision the goal, I see how I want it to turn out, how I'm going to feel when, you know, this happens, or as it's happening, and the excitement of achieving that goal, all of that, right? But then once I'm done with the meditation, I just sort of release it to God, the universe, or whoever, and say, okay, well, this is my vision, and here you go. I'm just going to release it to you and let it be whatever it is. And then I don't have to really obsess about it. I don't have to uh, worry about it. I just go on with my path. Like, this is what I really want to do. Here's my plot, right? Here's my life plot. This is where I'm headed. But I do have this vision out there somewhere, so that I know I've already thought about it. I know where I want to go, but I don't know that it's going to happen exactly the way that I envisioned it. It could happen differently depending on what life has in store for me, and I have to be okay with that. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about writing a story too, is to say, okay, here is my plot. Here's where I want it to go. But there may be my creativity, my creative energy, my creative soul, whatever you want to think about it, might have another idea. So if it starts to go something that doesn't sound, maybe even it does sound kind of crazy, as long as it doesn't sound insane, right? So if I'm writing a contemporary romance and all of a sudden I start putting aliens in there, this is a different type of story. And unless I'm changing my entire genre, I'm probably not going to want to go in that direction. I might play with it a bit. Maybe they're not really aliens. Maybe there's something else, and my creative energy is telling me there's this other force out here, right? So just follow it, see what happens. But if it gets too insane, just like, okay, well, obviously I'm not writing about aliens, so we need to get back to the story and put that aside. But again, trust that maybe it's not aliens, maybe it's something else that your creative muse, whatever, is trying to tell you. So do pay attention to it, do try to follow it, but then again, move back to center when it's definitely not going anywhere. So I guess what I'm saying is control your story, but don't control it so much that you don't give yourself the freedom to be a little more creative. So what I'm saying in this little short video is that you want to leave some room for the magic to happen. You want to leave that space there, because it will happen if you allow it to. You know, writing is all about creativity. It's all about writing something that doesn't exist anyways, right? It's all coming from our mind. So if you leave that space for creativity to emerge, for that magic to happen, you're going to end up with a much better book that probably touches readers more than you even imagine. And this process can teach us really to be more flexible and to flow a little bit more with our stories, rather than to try to control everything. I don't ever want to feel that I'm so arrogant that I know everything and that I know exactly how this story is supposed to be, because I have seen that sometimes I don't. Sometimes I think that this is what a story is about, and this is what the story is going to, what it's going to show, or what the plot's going to be, and then find that really, no, I didn't really want to write about this. I really had another intention in mind that I wasn't sure about, but that is coming through the story, right? So the story is the truth. And there's also, I don't know what you believe, but there's also something magical. There's something out there that helps us to create and to write our story. And maybe being quiet, listening to that, will get us closer to the story that we are intending to write and that we should write. So I hope this helps. I hope that this gives you some ideas and maybe some freedom to explore a little bit, and to not stick so, controlling to the plot of the story that you think that you want to write, but just to give yourself the freedom to explore a little bit more and try different things. All right, I hope that this has helped today, and if it has, please hit the like button, share it with other writing friends, and come back next week for the next video. See you then.